Hello. Thank you first to the organizers for this great meeting. And I'm going to present today the results of a project, CRCNS project that we started 3 years ago. And the goal of this project was to better understand the determinants of human choices. And in the introduction, I will start with a simple situations. You're offered once two possibilities or more. So let's say you're hiking, you can go left or right. And those different options, they have different attributes. And some of those attributes may involve even uncertainty. So how do we choose in this context? Well, a great line of thinkers have proposed and refined the intuitive idea that actually people's choices tend to maximize the expected value of their choice. How is this expected value computed? It's still something that is under investigation. But the main idea is that, yeah, a key determinant of human choices may be this expected value. Let's now turn to a different situation, which is the one we're going to explore in this study, which is the case of repeated choices. And to give a concrete example, every morning to go to work, I can either choose a suburb train or a bus. And every day I make a choice. So let's say that I choose the bus, I'm late. The next day I switch, choose the train, I'm on time. Then I choose the train again, and so on and so forth. So in this situation, we learn based on observations. So we learn the values of those options based on observations. And we only know the consequence of the chosen option. So this sort of situation creates a tension between maximizing rewards and actually getting to know the different options, so learning opportunities. And this is even more the case when you're in a volatile environment. So another potential choice determinant may be this desire to gain information about options and reduce uncertainty about their value. This example also demonstrates another kind of much simpler potential determinants, which is related more to Pavlovian effects, like the previous speaker? Introduce. So this is just what I did there. So if you get what you want, you stay. If you don't get what you want, you switch. And an even more simpler strategy could be just to repeat your previous choice, which is actually what I do most of the days. So repetition bias. So in this specific study, we were interested in the following question: does uncertainty play a role in those repeated choices? And this is not very clear because some previous studies reported no effect. Some reported that indeed we are choosing the more uncertain options in order to explore, but some other studies reported just the opposite. And in this study, we had the following hypothesis that actually there exists substantial heterogeneity across subjects in people's attitude toward uncertainty, which may explain potentially or contribute to explain conflicting studies in the result in the literature. And we had another hypothesis, which is that choices may not only be driven or avoided because of uncertainty, but uncertainty may also regulate the effect of other choice determinants. So to find out, we use what is formally a two-arm bandit task, in which you have two options, and you know the outcome only of the selected options. And you repeat this over and over. And we alternated between periods in which the subject is free or forced to choose a given option. This was in order to decorrelate the different choice determinants. And the latent values of this option could be either of 3 levels, so 30, 50, 70. And on a given trial, what subject was observing as an outcome was a noisy realization of this, with Gaussian noise added. And we varied the level of noise, again, to further decorrelate different choice determinants. And as you can see, there is volatility in this task because the latent value change over time, which make this tension between reward optimization and learning particularly salient. So subjects were fully instructed about the task structure, and we modeled their learning with an ideal Bayesian observer, which returns for each option a probability distribution over the 3 possible reward levels. And from this distribution, we can extract the expected reward, which is the mean, and the estimation uncertainty, which is the probability that is left at the maximum. And to illustrate, if you switch to this distribution, you have the same estimation uncertainty but different expected reward, and at the bottom you have the same expected reward but now a different estimation uncertainty. Okay, so based on this, we're trying to see whether we could account for the subject's choices, and we considered a list of putative choice determinants. So as motivated in the introduction, we add the repetition bias, the difference in expected reward between the two options. Whoops, going too fast. The difference in estimation uncertainty. We also consider the total uncertainty of the two options, so average uncertainty. And the last component based on the prediction error to capture those win-stay-lose-shift effects. And we split that into two components to potentially capture some asymmetry, as mentioned previously, but that's not important there. So we perform model comparison based on cross-validated choice likelihood, having different numbers of those choice determinants and combinations, and what we found was that actually all of those determinants are needed to explain the subject's choices. So this is what the final model looks like. We modeled the probability to repeat the previous choice as a softmax linear combination of those different choice determinants. So we can inspect the weights assigned to each of those determinants, and one dot as one subject in this graph. So by far, the main driver of human choices was expected reward. And then what is interesting is that the second most influencing factor was this repetition bias, and then a small but significant effect of uncertainty, and also a small but significant effect of this win-stay-lose-shift behavior. So the effect of uncertainty was significant, but as you can see, extremely variable across subjects. So compatible with our hypothesis, but we wanted to test whether this is really inter-individual differences and not simply noise in the data. So to check this, we took opportunity of the fact that actually our subject came twice to the lab, once to do the behavioral experiment and wants to do the same task in an fMRI scanner. So we fitted the model in those two sessions and then tested for correlations between parameter estimates. And you can see a great test-retest reliability of this for the repetition bias, the effect of expected reward, win-stay-lose-shift behavior, and critically also, although to a lesser extent, for uncertainty. So compatible with the idea that this is reflecting true inter-individual differences. And to test it further, we also used psychological scales used in the clinic and tested for correlation. And we found, for instance, compatible with previous studies, that the subject would tend to choose more often the more uncertain options, or less anxious and more impulsive. So again, reinforcing the idea that this is reflecting inter-individual differences. But our hypothesis was not only that uncertainty could guide the choices, but also regulate the use of those other choice determinants. So to find out, we tried whether including interactions between uncertainty and those other choice determinants could better account for choices. Again, with this cross-validated procedure. And we found two types of significant interactions. Between uncertainty, either the relative uncertainty and the total uncertainty, and the reward prediction error, such that subject were more likely to do the win-stay-lose-shift when shifting was more uncertain than staying, and when they were overall more uncertain about the option values. And as a reminder, we also find this effect of total uncertainty that increased the repetition bias, which is the default behavior of subjects. So overall, we are in a situation in which uncertainty tends to increase the effect of those simple choice heuristics. And of note, we've not found any effect of an interaction between uncertainty and reward, which well, is a bit conflicting with some previous studies. So uncertainty seems to play a role indeed in choices, and interestingly, this is something that subject can actually introspect. They are aware of this uncertainty. And we know that because from time to time we interrupted the task and we asked the subject what is the value of this option. And on most questions, actually their report matched the estimate of the ideal observer. And we also asked them how confident are you about your response. And this should be directly related to estimation uncertainty. And indeed, the subject's confidence and the model confidence were clearly related. So we can introspect this uncertainty about the option values. Okay, and last, actually, most of this project is about fMRI, but for the sake of time, I will just have one slide about it. So we use fMRI to identify the neural representations of those variables that serve as determinant of choices. So we started by looking at the effect of expected reward, and we found something that replicates previous finding, that activity in the ventral middle prefrontal cortex, ventral striatum, posterior parietal cortex, correlate with the difference between the expected value of the chosen option and the unchosen options. That's a relative value coding. But in our task, we have those free and forced choices. So we can ask the question, is this representation of value there only when you have to make a choice, or is it there at all times? And we found that actually this is only there when you're making the choice. So that's a representation that is specifically related to the choice. We can make a similar analysis with estimation uncertainty. And we found, for instance, that in the rostrolateral prefrontal cortex, there was this coding of relative uncertainty, which again was there only when you're free to choose, compatible with the idea that you use it to decide what to choose. And in contrast, in the intraparietal cortex, we found that this representation of uncertainty was there both when you're free to choose and forced to choose. Which is compatible with the idea that this representation of uncertainty may be there more for learning purposes, because you have to learn the option values both when you're free and forced to choose. Okay, so to wrap up, in this study, we show that choice are dominated by expected reward and a repetition bias, that uncertainty and a simple heuristic akin to win, stay, lose, shift play an additional role, that the effect of uncertainty is highly heterogeneous and idiosyncratic, that people resort more often to heuristic choices when they are more uncertain about option values, and last, that there are different neural representation of uncertainty for decision and learning. So as I said, this was a CRCNS funded project awarded to my lab, so Neurospin in France, and the work I presented today was mostly the work of Alexander Ponov and the lab of Angela Yu at UCSD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florent. We have time for one or two questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about, did you check the correlations with when people get the reward, the neural correlations of people getting the reward? Because some of your findings, they relate to, Bartra et al. From 2013, the meta-analysis of checking people when they get the reward and when they do choices. So I'm a bit surprised that with the forced choice, when you only get, when they get the reward, you don't see effect in VMPFC, PCC, and stuff like that. So maybe you have the data for looking at when they get the reward after they do the choice. So have you tested that, or?
So if I remember correctly, we had correlation with prediction error in typically ventral striatum for both free and forced choices, but more so for free choices, which is actually compatible with some previous studies, that this representation of the prediction error is more salient when you are the agent that leads to the observed outcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. So I was wondering regarding the correlation between the subject's confidence and the model's confidence. So I'm not sure how you operationalized it, but could it be that it's just capturing some kind of disengagement in the task from the subject's perspective?
So in subjects, yes, certainly you have some moments in the task when you're less confident about the option values just because you're less paying attention to the task. But this correlation was about a normative estimate of confidence, which is just based on observations and how confident should you be based on that, and the subject's confidence. So what it shows is that the confidence that you can experience and report to some extent has this strong normative components. It reflects how confident you should be based on the evidence that you've received and the probabilistic computations that you should perform.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? All right, last one.
Thanks. Just a quick one. You showed very nicely that there's a correlation between the parameters between test and retest. But I was wondering, I mean, correlation is high-ish, but I'm wondering, I mean, there's still quite a lot of variability, and I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts about why what determines this variability, and particularly whether there were any systematic biases in the parameters.
So, well, first, even if you do that on simulations, there will be variability just because you're estimating something based on a limited amount of data. So there is variability just due to that. Another source of variability is that there were actually some differences between the two tasks. For the fMRI task, we simplified the design. We spaced down the entire task. There were different response mappings, and well, so I take more the optimistic view of it. So despite all those differences, there was still some great correlations between the parameter estimate.